Mark McGee. I'm Senior Publisher, Director of Media Relations for the Athletics Department, and teach as an adjunct professor in the Communications Department, Communications and Journalism Department, that's right.
Awesome. Before that, in broadcasting and journalism, where did you work at?
Okay, when I was in high school, I was 16, 17, I worked for the Shelbyville Times-Gazette. I covered their police beat and covered some sports on the nights that I didn't play ball. Then came to college. I did a book for Opryland, yearbook photography for a yearbook my senior year. Then went back to the Shelbyville paper for a year and worked for them covering the city council and some other horses, the walking horse beat. And then came back to Opryland and worked for them another stretch, and then wound up at the Banner, Old Nashville Banner, as a sports writer in 1981, and worked for them for a little bit over 13 years. And then I left, I guess a couple years before it folded, maybe, and I just had an opportunity to go back to my hometown paper and go back to the Shelbyville Times-Gazette as the editor, and came out of the clear blue. Got called on a Sunday morning from the publisher saying, "Is this Mark McGee used to work at the paper?" And I said, "Yes," and because I was listed in the phone book as Stephen McGee. And I said, and that's my that, so I wouldn't have to have a unlisted number. And I said yes, and he said, "Would you come talk to me about being editor of the paper?" Never really thought about it, but I did, and wound up working for them for 7 years. And I caught wind that they were going to be sold, and so I started looking around for another position, because usually the editor is one of the first to go when a new group comes in, and maybe I would have been, maybe I wouldn't, but I didn't want to risk it. So Steve Potts, who was the athletic director of Lipscomb at that time, had been talking to me for about a year or two about coming here and working in media relations, and he said once we got into a conference, he would be coming back to talk with me, and that's about what happened. And so I came back. I came here, and I've been here almost 10 years now. I guess it'll be right at 10 years in February. I won't say it was Valentine's Day when I got the call from him. I think that's right.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, what was it like working for the Banner and the city paper back then?
I forgot about the city paper. I worked at the city paper as a part-timer all those at that time. So I also worked for National Sports Weekly, Titans Exclusive. Did a lot of stuff for the Predators and their publications as well, and their website. But I forgot about those things. Thanks for reminding me on that. But the Banner Banner and city paper were very different situations. Back then, the Banner and Tennessean, there was no such thing as a website. The internet was not around at that time. So really it was two newspapers going head to head every day. We were in the same building. Sometimes offices were right across from each other, across the hall. We ate lunch together, sometimes traveled together. But we fought tooth and nail against each other. I mean, for one more tidbit of information, you have one more sentence more than they had, you've done your job. And so there was always a big competition between us. I guess friendly competition is a nice way of putting it, but we weren't beyond going against each other pretty hard. And at that time, it was more clearly defined. You had two newspapers, and people said, well, the Banner broke that story or the Tennessean broke that story. There was not much confusion in that. And more often than not, the TV stations would say, the National Banner reported today that so-and-so happened, or the Tennessean reported today that so-and-so happened. And so you got a lot of publicity, a lot of coverage. Oftentimes the radio stations would call you up and say, hey, I saw you broke a story about Larry Schmittou buying a AAA baseball team. And he's denying it. What's your story? And lots of times, you go on the radio and defend your story or whatever, that type of thing. And so there was more of everybody knew where your stories came from. I mean, they knew who was breaking them. They knew which paper was doing it, which writer even was doing it to some extent. Where now with the internet and with Twitter, with all the Facebook and everything else, I mean, it's hard to really say who broke something and when. Jim White the other day from the Tennessean had some information about the Titans, so he tweeted it to the 3HL guys on 104.5, and they reported it. Now, they gave Jim White credit, but in the end of things, it gets so confusing who really did get the credit, who really did break it first. Jim had it, but he tweeted it to a radio station, so the radio station technically has the story first, from that standpoint. So things have changed from that end. It's not quite as it's not quite as clear cut. And I think the competition's still there, but not so much. I mean, C-Paper now is pretty much has one print edition, and it's gone pretty much to a web situation. And I don't know. I guess it's the old person in me, to some extent, that I've never felt that writing stores. I never felt that writing stores to their website when they switched over to the web only, except on Mondays. I never really felt like I was really doing a story for a big audience, so much of a big audience. And when they start doing that, lots of times people would question, is this for the print edition or is this for the web edition? And I just never could get. It was a little different. I mean, I write for our web every day, but that's what we're just. That's our news organization. But I think a newspaper should be print, and then if we have a website, that's fine and well. But but I just think that still I look at print. I guess I'm an old timer from that standpoint.
Yeah. What did you learn during your early years as a professional that helped you later on throughout your entire career?
Two of the best pieces of advice I got, and you probably heard me say one or two of these in class, but two of the best pieces of advice I got was, number one, you can never win an argument with an idiot, with an ignorant person. You cannot win an argument with an ignorant person, and you just need to understand that really quickly. And number two is, if you have nothing to write, then don't write. Those are two of the biggest things I was told. But I think also what I was told, and what I learned by watching the people I worked with was don't make a mistake. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all human, but try your best not to. You handle a lot of information. You handle a lot of, you're handling people's lives and reputations lots of times, especially on the police beat, that type of thing. So try not to, try to be accurate. Be true to what you're doing, and to be and not only to be fair, but to be down the middle. Don't pick sides on something. You might be for one side or against one side, but don't pick sides. So I always felt like if one of my stories generated arguments on both sides, then I'd done exactly what I was supposed to do. I was right down the middle. If both sides were yelling and screaming about the story, then I'd done what I was supposed to do. That's why I judged a lot of that. So I guess those would be the big things, and that that it's great to be first, but it's great to be first and be right. It's better to be first and be right. And lots of times we're seeing this day and time. The other day with Joe Paterno, a paper announced that he was dead. Now he did die 6 or 7 hours later maybe, but he wasn't dead at the time. And that goes back to the Twitter mentality and the internet mentality to be. We all want to be first, but there's not that. There was an accountability back in the old days. I don't think there's so much accountability anymore from that standpoint. But then I understand the managing editor of that paper resigned that night after that story was proven to be false, in which maybe it was overreaction, but he should have checked his sources a little bit more in that situation. So, but I think it goes back to just a change. I mean, we had some time back then to check things out, and there wasn't the immediacy of TV that you have now with all the different news stations and news networks, and we had there wasn't a Twitter situation, there wasn't an internet situation. You had times to check stories out more, and you really you had the luxury of being right lots of times, to make sure you had the time to do that.
Well, what inspired you to be a journalist?
Really nothing. I never thought I'd be doing this for my whole life. I'll tell you how I got started. When I was a freshman in high school, I wanted a new camera. I wanted a nice 35 millimeter SLR camera, and my parents said, "You don't need one because you have no reason to have one." And I said, so I thought, okay. So our yearbook staff had 3 photographers. They hired a new one every year, and so I thought, well, I was playing basketball and playing baseball. I thought I can work the yearbook staff in. I can do that. So I applied for the photographer's position that was open and then got it. And I told my parents, okay, even though we had nice Nikon cameras supplied for us, because we did a heavy amount of photography for the book, had our own dark room, everything. I said, okay, now I need a camera. Now I need a real good camera. And so that's how I got kind of started. And the sports editor of our paper also was the police writer, and he knew I was doing a lot of stuff for the yearbook and things like that, because he'd see me. I didn't play football, and he sent me a football game, shooting stuff and that type of thing. And so he started talking to me. He said, you can work this around playing your other sports. I quit playing basketball eventually, just was playing baseball. You can work around your other sports, working for me, and be shooting pictures of car wrecks, break-ins, ball games that the nights you're not playing, that type of thing. And so I thought it'd be interesting. I didn't sleep much. I never was much of a sleeper. So, I go out at 2 in the morning, shoot a car wreck, come back home, and be at school at 8 o'clock, and that type of thing. I just never thought much about it, and it never really required a lot of sleep. And so I did that. It was fun.